After the baby was born, my husband pulled my hair and gave me a slap because I wouldn't clean. However, after my baby was born, things in my marriage changed drastically and not in the way I had imagined. Jacob, my husband, seemed to become a different person. At first, it was subtle, the little comments here and there, the cold glances when I didn't do something fast enough. But then, one day, things escalated beyond what I could have ever expected. The house was unusually quiet, almost unnervingly so. The only sound that broke the silence was my baby's soft, tired whimpers. I was sitting in the rocking chair, holding him tightly, trying to soothe him to sleep. My body ached from exhaustion, and I barely had the energy to keep my eyes open. That's when it happened. Out of nowhere, I felt a sharp tug on my hair. My head jerked back, and before I could even process what was happening, Jacob slapped me across the face. The force of the blow sent a burning pain through my cheek, and I blinked rapidly, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to spill. But more than the physical pain, it was the shock that hit me hardest. How could this be happening? How had things gotten so bad so quickly? "This is for your own good, Lily," Jacob said coldly. His voice had a strange calmness to it, like he believed what he was doing was somehow justified. But I couldn't make sense of his words. How could hurting me ever be good for me? What kind of logic was this? I stayed silent, clutching my baby tighter to my chest. My heart was racing, pounding so hard that I could barely hear anything over the sound of my own fear. I wanted to scream, to shout at him, to ask why. But I didn't. I couldn't. My baby needed me to stay calm. So I just sat there, letting the fear and confusion wash over me. My name is Lily, and I'm 30 years old. I became a mother for the first time just a few weeks ago. Being a mother is something I had dreamed about for years, but now that it had finally happened, nothing was going the way I had imagined. Sure, there were moments of joy, like when I first held my baby in my arms, or when I saw him smile in his sleep. But those moments were overshadowed by the overwhelming challenges of new motherhood. And now, the man who was supposed to be my partner, my support, had turned into someone I barely recognized. When we brought our son home from the hospital, I was filled with a mix of excitement and fear. I knew my life would change, but I wasn't prepared for just how hard it would be. The exhaustion hit me like a truck. My body was still healing from the birth, and on top of that, I had this tiny human who needed me constantly. I loved him more than anything, but I felt like I was losing myself in the process. The house quickly fell into disarray. Laundry piled up, dishes went unwashed, and I couldn't find the time or energy to take care of anything outside of the baby. Jacob didn't seem to understand what I was going through. His patience, which had never been his strong suit, quickly disappeared. He started making snide comments about the state of the house, asking why I wasn't keeping things clean like I used to. I tried to explain that I was exhausted, that I was doing the best I could, but it didn't seem to matter to him. He wanted things done his way, and when they weren't, he got angry. The day he slapped me was a turning point. I realized then that things were worse than I had let myself believe. I had been in denial, hoping that the stress of the new baby was just taking a toll on us and that things would get better. But after that slap, I knew something had shifted, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be fixed. The weight of expectations. After that incident, I found myself walking on eggshells around Jacob. I tried harder to keep the house clean, to do what I thought he expected of me, but it was never enough. No matter how hard I worked, there was always something wrong. A dish left in the sink, a toy on the floor, any small thing could set him off, and I couldn't afford to make a mistake. One afternoon, as I was bouncing my baby in my arms, trying to calm his cries, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened the door, I saw my mother-in-law, Ella, standing there. Her sharp eyes immediately scanned the room, taking in the mess, the baby toys scattered across the floor, the laundry overflowing in the basket, the dishes piled high in the sink. I felt a wave of embarrassment wash over me. I hadn't had time to clean, and I could tell from the look on Ella's face that she noticed. "I thought I'd drop by and see how you were doing," Ella said, stepping over the toys as she entered the house. "Jacob mentioned you might need some help." There was no warmth in her voice, no genuine concern. It was more like she was here to check up on me, to see if I was living up to her expectations. I forced a smile, trying to hide the stress that was bubbling up inside me. "Thanks, Ella," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's been busy, but we're managing." Ella didn't look convinced. She walked into the kitchen, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of the dirty dishes in the sink. I could feel her judgment like a physical weight pressing down on me. "It looks like you need more than a little help," she said, her tone sharp. "Is this how you're planning to raise my grandson? In a house that looks like this?" Her words cut deep. I had been trying so hard, but nothing I did ever seemed to be enough, not for Jacob, and now, not for Ella either. "I'm doing the best I can," I said softly, holding my baby tighter. It felt like I was constantly defending myself, constantly trying to explain that I was doing my best, even if no one seemed to believe me. Ella sighed dramatically. "Being a mother is about getting your priorities straight, Lily, and it seems like you're not doing that." Before I could respond, Jacob walked into the room. He immediately sensed the tension in the air and tried to diffuse the situation. "Mom, Lily's doing fine," he said, stepping between us. "It's been hard with the baby not sleeping well." But Ella wasn't ready to back down. She turned to Jacob, her voice firm. "You need to help her understand what's important, Jacob. It's not just about keeping the house tidy. It's about responsibility. She's not doing what's expected of her." Jacob looked torn, glancing between me and his mother. For a moment, I thought he might defend me, might tell his mother to back off. But then to my shock he nodded. "Maybe you're right, Mom," he said, his voice quiet. "Maybe Lily does need to step up." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been doing everything I could, but instead of supporting me, Jacob was siding with his mother. I felt completely alone. Ella, satisfied with Jacob's response, gave him a small smile and nudged him toward me. "Shover, this can't go on," she said. A line crossed. I was already feeling completely overwhelmed. Taking care of a newborn was exhausting, and now I had to deal with the constant judgment and criticism from the people who were supposed to support me. Every day felt like a struggle to keep my head above water, but no matter how hard I tried, I always seemed to be drowning. Before I could react, Jacob reached out, grabbed a handful of my hair, and yanked me toward him. Then, just like before, he slapped me hard across the face. The sharp crack of his hand against my skin echoed through the room. I gasped, clutching my baby even tighter as his cries grew louder. The slap stung, but what hurt even more was the fact that Jacob had crossed a line that I didn't think could ever be uncrossed. This wasn't just a moment of anger. This was something else, something darker. I had never imagined that the man I had married, the father of my child, would be capable of hurting me like this. "Jacob, what are you doing?" I whispered, my voice shaking as tears filled my eyes. The pain in my cheek was nothing compared to the pain in my heart. I felt utterly betrayed. "This is for your own good, Lily," Jacob said, his voice cold and emotionless. He didn't even look at me as he spoke. "You need to get things under control." The room fell into an eerie silence. The only sound was my baby's soft cries, his tiny whimpers mixing with the thudding of my heart. Jacob's face was hard, his jaw clenched in frustration. There was no regret in his eyes, no sign that he realized what he had done was wrong. Ella stood nearby, watching the scene unfold with an unreadable expression. She didn't seem shocked by Jacob's actions. If anything, she looked as though she had expected this all along. I couldn't believe what was happening. What should have been a supportive visit from family had turned into something twisted and terrifying. Instead of helping me, instead of offering comfort, they had brought judgment, violence, and fear into my home. As Ella turned to leave, she whispered something to Jacob, but I couldn't hear what she said. It didn't matter. Her cold, calculating expression told me everything I needed to know. A plan to escape. That night, I sat in the nursery, rocking my baby to sleep. My heart was still pounding with fear, my mind racing with thoughts of what had happened. The house that had once felt like a home now felt like a prison. I felt trapped, constantly judged, constantly afraid. As I held my baby close, I made a decision. For both of our sakes, I needed to leave. Jacob had crossed the line, and with Ella egging him on, I knew things would only get worse. I couldn't stay here any longer. I couldn't risk putting myself or my baby in danger. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jacob's face, heard the coldness in his voice, as he told me that hurting me was for my own good. I couldn't believe I had ever thought I could trust him. The next morning, when Jacob was at work and Ella wasn't around, I made a call. I dialed my friend Anna, who had always been there for me, even when things got tough. "Anna, it's Lily," I said, my voice trembling. "I need help." Anna didn't hesitate. "I'll be there soon," she said. "We'll pack your things and you and the baby can stay with me until you figure out what to do next." Tears filled my eyes as I thanked her. I didn't know what I would have done without her support. I had no idea how I was going to navigate this, but I knew that I couldn't do it alone. Quiet preparations. Over the next few days, Anna and I carefully planned my escape. We agreed that I would pack my things during the day while Jacob was at work. I couldn't risk him finding out what I was doing. The idea of facing him after what had happened terrified me. Each day, I gathered a little more. I packed only the essentials, clothes for me and the baby, important documents, a few keepsakes. I didn't want to take too much in case Jacob came home early and noticed something was off. My heart raced every time I heard the door creak or a car pass by the house. I was constantly on edge, always afraid that Jacob or Ella would come home unexpectedly and catch me in the act. But I knew I had to stay focused. I had to do this for my baby. He deserved to grow up in a home filled with love and safety, not fear. Anna checked in with me every day, offering words of encouragement and helping me stay calm. She was my lifeline, the one person I knew I could trust. Knowing she was there for me made all the difference. On the day of our planned escape, Anna arrived in the late afternoon, just as the sun was beginning to set. Her presence brought a sense of calm to the storm that had been raging inside me for days. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice soft but serious. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, holding my baby close. My heart was pounding, but I knew this was the right thing to do. Leaving it all behind. We worked quickly, moving the packed bags into Anna's car. Each trip felt like a step closer to freedom. The last thing I packed was the nursery, the one place that had brought me comfort during all the chaos. It was hard to leave, but I knew I had to. As we drove away, I watched the house shrink in the rearview mirror. My heart was heavy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. My baby, fast asleep in his car seat, had no idea that his world was about to change for the better. When we arrived at Anna's house, I was overwhelmed with gratitude. Her home was warm, cozy, and filled with love. It was such a stark contrast to the cold, tense atmosphere I had left behind. I hadn't realized just how suffocating it had been until I finally had a chance to breathe. That night, as I lay in bed with my baby sleeping peacefully beside me, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I had made it out. But I also knew that leaving was just the first step. Jacob and Ella still had a hold over me, and I needed to make sure they couldn't hurt us again. Building a case. In the days that followed, I began to gather evidence to protect myself and my baby. I knew that I couldn't go back to Jacob, and I needed to ensure that he and Ella couldn't manipulate or control me anymore. I started by reaching out to family members and friends. I asked them about their experiences with Ella, trying to gather any information that could help me build a case against her. I knew I wasn't the only one who had felt the weight of her control. Some people were hesitant to talk, either out of fear or loyalty to Ella, but as I dug deeper, I started to uncover a pattern of behavior. It wasn't just me. Ella had a history of manipulating and controlling the people around her. I began collecting text messages, voicemails, and even secretly recorded conversations. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of the toxic environment I had been living in. The most damning piece of evidence came when I managed to record a conversation between Ella and Jacob. In the recording, Ella was telling Jacob how to keep me in line, as if I were nothing more than an object to be controlled. Hearing her say those words made me realize just how deep her manipulation went. It wasn't just about keeping the house clean or meeting expectations, it was about control. The confrontation. With the evidence in hand, I knew it was time to confront Jacob and Ella. The perfect opportunity came when the family planned a gathering at Jacob's sister's house. I knew that if I revealed the truth in front of the entire family, they would have no choice but to see Ella and Jacob for who they really were. The day of the gathering, I was a bundle of nerves. My hands shook as I got ready, and my stomach was in knots. But I knew I had to do this for myself, for my baby, and for everyone else who had been affected by Ella's control. Anna came with me for support. Her presence was a calming force, and I was grateful to have her by my side. When we arrived at the gathering, I could feel the tension in the air. People greeted me with cautious smiles, sensing that something was different but unsure of what it was. I kept quiet during the small talk, waiting for the right moment to speak. Once everyone had settled down, I stood up. "I have something important to say," I began, my voice shaky but determined. All eyes turned toward me. "It's about Jacob, Ella, and the way their actions have hurt not just me, but this entire family." Jacob's face turned pale and he leaned toward me, whispering urgently, "Lily, don't do this here, please." But I had already made up my mind. "No, Jacob, this isn't just about me," I said, pulling out my phone from my pocket. I connected it to a small speaker I had brought with me and pressed play. The room fell silent as Ella's voice filled the air, instructing Jacob on how to control me. The cold, calculating tone of her voice sent chills down my spine. As the recording played, I watched as the faces of my family members shifted from confusion to shock. The truth comes out. When the recording finished, the room was silent. No one knew what to say. I could see the disbelief in their eyes, the shock and horror at hearing Ella's words. Jacob sat frozen, his face pale. Ella, on the other hand, looked furious. She quickly tried to defend herself, claiming that the recording had been taken out of context, that she hadn't meant what she said. But the damage was done. The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. Slowly, family members began to speak up. One by one, they shared their own stories of how Ella had manipulated and controlled them over the years. It was as if a floodgate had opened, and the truth was finally spilling out. For years, Ella had maintained a tight grip on the family, using her power and influence to get what she wanted. But now her control was slipping. People were starting to see her for who she really was. Jacob sat silently, his eyes downcast. I could see the regret in his expression, but it was too late. The trust between us had been shattered, and there was no going back. Breaking free. After the confrontation, the family was left in shock. For years, they had lived under Ella's influence, not fully realizing how much power she had over them. But now, with the truth out in the open, they began to pull away from her. The hold she once had over them was slipping, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. For me, leaving Jacob was painful, but it was the right choice. There was no going back after what had happened. I gathered my son, who was still too young to understand what was happening, and walked away from the life I had once thought was mine. Jacob watched us leave, his face full of regret, but I didn't look back. As for Ella, her fall from grace was swift. Family members distanced themselves from her, and her attempts to regain control were met with cold indifference. The truth was too clear for anyone to be fooled by her manipulations anymore. A fresh start. In the days and weeks that followed, Jacob tried reaching out to me, apologizing and promising to change. He begged me to come back, saying that he had made a mistake and that he would do anything to make it right. But it was too late. The memory of his slap and the way he had sided with Ella couldn't be erased. The bond between us had been broken, and there was no way to fix it. I moved into a small apartment far away from the life I had once known. It was a fresh start for both me and my son, a chance to build a new life without the weight of the past holding us down. There were moments of doubt, moments where I wondered if I had made the right choice, but deep down, I knew I had. My son was my priority now. I wanted to give him a life filled with love and safety, a life free from fear and control. It wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to make it work. As time went on, I found strength in myself that I didn't know I had. I learned how to stand on my own, how to build a life for myself and my son without relying on anyone else. I surrounded myself with people who truly cared about me, people who supported me without judgment or expectation. Looking back, I realized that leaving Jacob and Ella was the best decision I could have made. It wasn't just about protecting myself, it was about creating a better future for my son. He deserved to grow up in a home filled with love, not fear. And as I watched him grow, I knew that we were finally free.